So the coordinators' guidelines are approved. The calendar of meetings for 25 is accepted. On the working program, coordinators agreed, of course, to invite Commissioner Jørgensen. We've been very effective. He's here already. And the EVP Fitto will come later to our meetings, public hearings and missions. Coordinators accepted IMCO's proposal for housing participation in the public hearing that took place on the 18th of February. And then coordinators instructed the chair to seek maximum involvement also in other hearings, specifically the Regi EMPOL public hearing on European Housing Plan, which will take place on March 19. The EMPOL interparliamentary meeting on affordable housing, which will take place on April the 9th. And then also the own initiative report on the MFF post-2027 by the Budget Committee. Coordinators also approved a mission to Barcelona for week 22nd and approved the request for a public hearing on state aid rules on housing, and then also agreed to organize and participate in a joint event on housing matters with the European Commission. Today, prior to this meeting, we also had another coordinators meeting, and the decisions taken will be circulated by the Secretariat. So let's now move, and the minutes of our constitutive meeting will be adopted in the next meeting. Now, here we are. Dear Commissioner Jørgensen, thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the Special Committee on the Housing Crisis in the European Union, I warmly welcome you to this important exchange of views. Our committee was recently established with a clear mandate to address one of the most pressing challenges facing European citizens today. Across the Union, we see mounting evidence of a housing crisis that affects all segments of society, from young people struggling to find their first home, to families facing rising rents and energy costs, to elderly citizens in need of adapted housing solutions. The housing challenge must be approached from multiple perspectives, social, financial, regulatory, while ensuring the importance of the adequate level of funding, both public and private. Leveraging best practices from member states and European programs will be essential to designing effective and scalable solutions. Among these many dimensions, the link between housing and energy is particularly crucial, as reflected in your dual portfolio, and strengthening this synergy is key to ensuring that our efforts in housing not only improve affordability and accessibility, but also drive sustainability through energy efficiency and renovation. So our committee has begun its work with a sense of urgency, knowing that citizens across Europe expect concrete solutions. We are particularly interested in the Commission planned initiatives under the European Affordable Housing Plan, announced in President von der Leyen's political guidelines. The recently launched Affordable Housing Dialogue represents an important step, and we look forward to close cooperation between our institutions on this initiative. As we prepare for our joint conference later this month, this exchange provides a valuable opportunity to align our perspectives and explore potential synergies. We are eager to hear your assessment of the key challenges ahead and your vision for addressing them. In particular, we would welcome your thoughts on how we can best leverage existing EU instruments while potentially developing new tools to tackle the housing crisis effectively. So, the floor is yours, Commissioner. You have 7 minutes. We look forward for a productive discussion.
Thank you so much, President. And let me first of all thank you for inviting me to this, your first meeting. I think that setting up a special committee like this, just as the fact that President von der Leyen chose to give housing as a dedicated portfolio to a commissioner, both of those things signal to our populations that we indeed take the challenges extremely serious. We know that the housing sector has many problems, that many people are affected in negative ways. So I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I very much look forward to our collaboration. Let me briefly set out the approach of the Commission, why we are taking on this task, what we can do at a European level, and finally how and when we will do it. Let me begin with the why. Over the last 15 years or so, rents have gone up by around a quarter in real terms, and house prices are up around a half. In 2023, around 10% of the EU population spent 40% or more of their disposable income on housing and related costs. And perhaps most sadly of all, the latest figures we have suggests that almost 900,000 people are currently homeless in Europe. Every night in Europe, a population comparable to that of Marseille or Turin is without a home. These numbers and the people behind them are the essence of the housing crisis in Europe. And I think you will share my view. These numbers are simply unacceptable. When nurses, firefighters, teachers and police officers cannot afford to live in the cities that they serve, this is, of course, unacceptable. It has very severe social consequences, but also directly impacts European economy in our competitiveness. The lack of affordable homes where the jobs are impacts entry into the job market and reduces labor mobility, impacting in turn economic dynamism. And that is why we are taking on this task. But what can we do in the Parliament and in the Commission? We know that housing is mostly the responsibility of member states. I can just add that I used to be a member of this House for almost 10 years, from 2004 to 2013, and I don't remember having any discussions on housing. Probably if we had had them 20 years ago, maybe we wouldn't have been in this situation today. But now it is high on our agenda. We acknowledge that most of the responsibility lies in member states, with regional and local authorities, and of course we must respect subsidiarity. But I will also argue, and I'm sure you will all agree with me, that there is clearly room for Europe at the table, and there is a lot of things we can and should do. And it's not as if we're not doing anything already. We are supporting housing at the EU level. For instance, 21.3 billion from the Recovery Resilience Facility has been earmarked for housing reforms and investments. But we can do more, and we will do more. We've planned to double the cohesion policy investments in affordable housing, and we can mobilize public and private investments through the planned Pan-European Investment Platform in collaboration with the EIB and other financial partners. I'm also aware about issues caused by short-term rentals. I recognize how essential tourism is to many regions and cities, but I also hear from many cities, and in particular those who want to prevent negative impacts on local residents, that we can do more. The new EU regulation, which comes into effect next year, will bring much needed transparency, and I'm eager to listen to your thoughts on other ways in which EU can help remedy this problem. We can look at revising legislation, such as the current state aid rules, to see if there are unnecessarily restricting investments in affordable housing also. We can address the supply of housing. We can increase simplification, improve access to materials, advance technological innovation in building methods, remove obstacles in cross-border provisions of services and skilled labor, and help to improve efficiency in how the existing housing stock is being used. So in short, we can do a lot. The only question is, how do we do it? First and foremost, the theme of 2025 will be outreach, engagement and consultation. We will seek open and inclusive cooperation with the different institutions and reach out to external stakeholders at all levels. I am very grateful, Madam Chair, that you will host our first joint consultation event together at the 24th of March with an impressive lineup of speakers. I'm pleased that our teams are talking about holding as many hearings together, also looking together at what studies we need to conduct. This engagement will feed into our affordable housing plan, the first of its kind, which President von der Leyen has tasked me with putting forward. The work has already begun. Starting inside the Commission, I'm working closely with my colleagues in our new Commissioners Group on Housing. And since the 1st of February, I'm relying also on a new housing task force within the Commission. But perhaps more importantly, the affordable housing plan must be shaped with all European regions, cities, rural communities, and outermost areas. The direct contact with you, which you have with your constituencies, will be vital. I hope to hear from you, but also from citizens directly. It will be particularly important to organize a youth dialogue on housing, because it seems to me that the vast number of young people are affected by this problem, so they need to have their say in the solution. Let me stop here, as I want to hear your suggestions how we are to approach these difficult tasks. With one final message. I know that the Commission cannot fix the housing crisis single-handed, but as Commissioner, I will fight hand in hand with you to support everyone who is impacted by this crisis. We do not have any one silver bullet, but we do have many tools that can make a difference to advance affordable and decent and sustainable housing in Europe. So let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now we start our first round of question. Let me just remind, you have 1.5 minutes for the question, and then there are 3 minutes reply by the Commissioner. We start with the EPP, Nicolina Brognac.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Jørgensen, the housing crisis in Europe is deeply connected with energy policy. As we work toward a climate-neutral Europe, we must ensure that energy efficiency requirements do not compromise housing affordability. The EPP firmly believes that the green transition and affordable housing must go hand in hand and not create additional burdens on families, homeowners, and housing developers. How does the Commission plan to ensure that energy efficiency rules do not lead to higher housing costs or pushing people into energy poverty? We also see an urgent need to streamline EU regulations affecting housing construction. The current regulatory framework covering construction products, state aid, environmental standards, and public procurement often delays projects and increases costs. Therefore, we call for an immediate review of these rules to eliminate unnecessary burdens and accelerate housing development. When can we expect concrete Commission proposals in this direction? And also the regulation on short-term rentals will provide us with a more transparent data on this after 2026. Could you tell me if the Commission is in the process of preparing specific measures to tackle the effect of short-term rentals on affordable housing based on that data? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very relevant questions and comments. There were many questions, so I probably cannot touch on them all in a few minutes, but I'm sure colleagues will also come back to some of them. The bulk of your questions were on energy efficiency and how to make sure that we don't end up in the paradoxical situation that what we want to do is actually create better homes for people, but in fact it may lead to higher prices. So a few comments on that. One is energy poverty is also a huge problem in Europe. About between 45 and 47 million people last year were not able to adequately heat their homes. Part of that is because of the too high energy prices. We're dealing with that also in a different track. But it's also because many dwellings are simply not up to standard. They're not energy efficient. They're not isolated well enough. The heating sources are not the right ones, and so forth. So there's no doubt in my mind that the right way forward is to make sure that we help as many families and owners and renters in Europe as possible in the future to live in houses that are indeed better suited with regards to energy efficiency. And this House has been co-legislator in adopting in the last mandate a lot of important regulation in that regard. Now, of course, the big challenge is that even though the investments are paid back very fast when it comes to energy efficiency, compared to, for instance, deploying renewable energy or, by the way, fossil energy, it's one of the best investments you can make. Still, I think we all need to acknowledge that there is a danger that it will put pressure on people's economy. So we need answers for that. The EU can support some of these via the different funding arrangements that we have. But I also think it's important that we work very closely with the member states on the implementation of the legislation. As you will all know, obviously, it's up to the member states in the end to make sure that and to decide how they wish to implement the rules in the different countries. And we obviously want to underline that this needs to be done in a way that also has an eye to the social impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Gabriele Bischoff for S&D.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Sie sehen, wir...
Thank you very much. We really want to contribute to this Commission programme. Now, I agree with what you've said. This is a horizontal issue. I come from Berlin, and I think we do have a lot to contribute when it comes to our experience of being on the ground. So my question would be, I have heard when it comes to the horizontal working group in the Commission that state aid is also related to that and the single market. So do you really have enough information there from the different services? I think it is important to have that. And as my colleague said, my concern is that there are potential infringement procedures in a number of cities because they've tried to restrict the amount of short-term letting. And we see these distortions that have been caused by Airbnb, for example. But then we have the protection of freedom of services. But you have to weigh that with the citizens' rights and having a right to housing. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And yes, I'm also very sure that the direct contact that you have with your electorates in the different parts of Europe that you represent will be very valuable to us here. And the last topic that you mentioned, short-term rentals, is certainly one, because we have to be very honest that there's very different opinions on what to do about this problem. I think there's a bulk of countries and regions that think we need to do more and that it is a problem. But there are also some that don't see this problem and for whom they want to be as free as possible in deploying these new types of platforms. So I really would encourage you also to all gather information on this to help us in the process, because in my opinion is that even though we have just in the last mandate passed new legislation that will be implemented next year, then we are not where we need to be. I don't see any other way than we need to do more. So the question is, what do we then need to do? So this is one of the areas we'll work closely on. And on the state aid rules, yes, this is one of the areas that I've also been mandated in my mission letter to do something about. The problem, as I see it, and what we hear from member states and from many of you, is that the definitions are too strict with regards to where state aid can be used. There are certain groups that are not necessarily defined as socially less advantaged, or the different wordings that are in legislation now that do indeed need help, that cannot afford the market price. So we need to look at that, whilst at the same time, of course, not ruining the fundamentals of the internal market and distort the commercial housing market. So that's the balance that needs to be found. And indeed, the special group, working group set down in the Commission is one of the areas where we will one of the places where we will take this discussion, but it's also bilaterally between me and Executive Vice President Ribera, who is, of course, the main responsible for this area, and she's very engaged to this. You have probably already discussed it with her yourself, but we will be very focused on finding solutions here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Jorge Villalba.
Sí, muchas gracias, comisario.
Thank you, Commissioner. As you yourself said, housing is a national competence, not of the EU, but it is a competence of the EU to change the directive on VAT. And I would ask you to examine this, the possibility for you to declare exempt or zero rate all the process from the land purchase by the developer to the purchase of the property by the buyer. But that said, I have a few questions that our party is asking in Spain, which I'd like you to evaluate, which is the huge cost of building housing, but the price is caused by scarcity. It's a question of supply and demand. It's basic economics. So housing is something which is necessary, but if you are going to limit the supply, then if you increase supply, then price will fall. So price controls will not work. So you need to reduce costs and bureaucracy and taxes. Young Europeans don't want to live in climatically neutral spaces. They just want a house to live in. So you have to abolish these climatic rules and look at public housing. My party has developed 500 houses in a small village in Seville. This is the way forward. And at some point, Commissioner, we have to realize that subsidizing is discriminating, and you can't decide to give money to some and not to others. The market has its own rules. You have to increase supply, and if you're going to restrict demand, then that's not going to bring in investment from outside. Thank you.
So this intervention also clearly shows, of course, that there are also ideological differences when dealing with this problem. I have many members of the House that would respectfully disagree with you, sir, that would say that actually we need no more state aid and maybe less market. So how do we find these balances? That is what lies ahead of us in the months to come. I will say, though, that even though that we disagree on some issues, I think that your analysis that there is too little supply must be something that we can all agree on. Problem is then, of course, how do we make sure that we get a larger supply? It's not something that can easily be done, and indeed some of the measures that you mentioned, for instance tax, will also be looked at very differently from country to country. And to some extent, that is also, not to some extent, to a very large extent, that is also within the subsidiarity principle. I come from a country, Denmark, with a very, where taxes are quite high, and where we have different financing instruments to build social housing, for instance. I know for a fact that many countries would think that would be an extreme way to go, a very socialized way to go. But I would I would consider it a very big problem if the EU said you cannot go this way. Just as if other countries want to say, okay, for us the most important thing is to have lower taxes, then okay, it's probably not up to the EU to determine whether or not that's fair enough. Where we need to find common solutions is where we do indeed have instruments from the EU side. We would then probably disagree on how to deploy them, but nonetheless, this problem is so big that we cannot afford not to use the instruments that we have, and so we will probably disagree on the state aid issue, because that is one that I intend to pursue and the Commission will pursue, but I look forward to listening to your arguments in discussing this in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Georgiana Teodorescu for ECR.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Jørgensen, for being here with us today and for addressing our questions. We have just started this mandate, and while our time is limited, I believe we are all striving to cover the most pressing housing issues affecting European citizens. My main concern is the growing number of young people who cannot access affordable housing, leading to significant challenges in terms of demography across Europe. The issue impacts not only individuals' quality of life, but also has long-term consequences for economic stability. So here are my questions on this matter. The first one, on energy efficiency. Since the Green Deal imposes stringent renovations and energy efficiency requirements on house owners, how does the Commission exactly plan to balance environmental goals with housing affordability, ensuring that young people are not priced out of the market due to rising costs associated with mandatory renovations or constructions? The second one, urban areas are becoming increasingly unaffordable while rural communities continue to decline. How does the Commission plan to support policies that encourage young people to settle in rural areas by improving infrastructure, digital connectivity, and economical opportunities in terms of jobs? And the last one, looking ahead to the next 5 years, can you specify how much funding will be effectively allocated to housing projects and what measures are in place to ensure that these funds reach young people who actually need them the most? Thank you.
Thank you so much for focusing on the young. I do think that that's important. Extremely important. It's obviously not the only group in our societies that are facing problems and challenges, but it is a group that's very hard hit, and that's also why I will be having a specialized youth dialogue also on housing to listen to the voices of the youth. Again, of course, we need to remember that even though I think it's fair to say for, if not all, then almost all member states, that there's a special problem with housing for youth, probably when you then dissecate and analyze what is the problem, it will be different from country to country. That goes without saying, but that's also an extra reason for us to make the analysis fast before we make decisions. On energy efficiency, so as I stated a little bit earlier, there's a lot of new legislation in place, and most of it has been made also in this House by the co-legislators. So instead of revisiting the discussion about whether or not it should have looked one way or the other, that's not my job now. My job is to then help implement it, what has already been decided. I will, however, say that although I do acknowledge and understand that when you need more investments into making homes more energy efficient, that can lead to higher prices, that is something we need to deal with. I also spoke on that earlier. We also have to think about what would the opposite situation be like. If we said, for young people, there's no renovation, it's not necessary. Then we would have a generation of young people living in unisolated, cold dwellings. It will not be good for our society as a whole, but certainly wouldn't be good for those young people either. So we need to go the other way. We need to find ways of how we can make these energy renovations and how we can make more sustainable and affordable houses for young people, students, not only students, but certainly also students. And this is also one of the areas where I want to look at best practices. I found that even within countries, you can have some regions where they've more or less solved this issue, and other regions very close to where young people cannot find a house. So, and that's just within countries. Then looking across our union, the divergence is huge. So let's all go back home to our countries and regions and cities and look at what's working and not working, so that we can share best practices. And if there's then something we can do also with legislation, creating incentives, spending EU money, our funding possibilities, then I'm definitely willing to look at it. On the funding side, this is pretty complex, of course, since there's many different types of funding where EU money can actually help. So I don't have one number I can give you, but the biggest new money that we have put on the table is, of course, the doubling of the amount of cohesion funding that can be used from 7.5 to 15 billion, which is a lot of money, especially if it's used in the right way.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Charan Mololi from Renew.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, many thanks for coming to the committee this afternoon. On behalf of the Renew Europe Group, I wish to say we're looking forward to a fruitful relationship with you over the lifetime of the committee and indeed beyond. In your mission letter from President von der Leyen, you were asked to urgently address the housing crisis by supporting Member States to unlock public and private investment for affordable and sustainable housing. Now, this is a mammoth task, as you know, Commissioner, but in this context, one of the initiatives referenced and caught my attention was the Pan-European Platform for Investment for Affordable and Sustainable Housing. From my perspective, ensuring we attract more public and private investment is absolutely crucial if we want to deal with the housing crisis. So therefore, my question today is simple. How is this going to work? Has work started on this? Is work with the European Investment Bank underway? Are there other institutions on board? Can you give us an update today? I can only speak, Commissioner, about my own member state, but in Ireland it appears that the whole construction sector was ground to a halt. Ireland's housing crisis remains one of the most urgent social challenges of our time, and the shortfall in social housing is a key driver of homelessness and housing insecurity. It's crucial we get this sector back to work. Finally, charities and NGOs have consistently highlighted the need for a fundamental shift in how social housing funding is provided and delivered by Europe and at member state level. One of the ways to deal with this is ensuring we have adequate pre-financing of our schemes. To meet demand, governments must increase the social housing budget, ensuring local authorities have the resources to deliver. My last word to a lady called Hannah Clark from St Vincent de Paul in Navan in County Meath. I spoke to her about the housing crisis last week. In the past, she provided food and fuel for couples and families in her area. Now, she's been asked to provide rent. The squeezed middle are now not able to pay their rent, Commissioner. We urge you to do your best to resolve this situation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I also look forward to collaborating, and yes, indeed, we will be putting forward a pan-European. There's no sound? Either I'm saying something stupid and you're doing like this, or there's no sound, or maybe both. I could. Okay. Sure. Double up. Okay. Is that better?
If you put this, and you will be better.
Okay. I once gave a lecture in a university where it did not go well. People were not laughing at my jokes. I thought, what is going on? So I asked, can you hear me in the back? And there was actually somebody in the back row saying, no, I cannot hear you. But then there was somebody on the first vote that said, I would like to change seats then. Anyway, so can we go on? Yeah. So, EIB and the Pan-European Investment Platform. Later this week, I'm going to Luxembourg, and we will present the first steps together with the bank. And it's very clear that this is one of the areas where we can actually do something on a European level, where we can actually spark something in member states. But it doesn't stop here. We need, and all good ideas are very welcome. How can we spark private investments? So, okay, yes, state aids can and will be an important part of the solution in many countries, but obviously the whole, to provide the supply of housing that we need in Europe, it's clear that the lion's share of the investments needs to be, of course, private. So how can we use public, whether it's from member states or EU money, to spark that? That's the big task, and the Pan-European platform will certainly be a part of the solution, but also, of course, clearly not the whole solution. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Maria Ohisalo from the Greens.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear Commissioner Jørgensen, welcome to the first meeting of the Housing Committee. I really expect for a fruitful cooperation between the committee and the Commission. For us Greens, we have particular focus points on housing, although we know that this 1 year will not be enough, but still I hope that we could together focus on tackling financialization of the housing market, strengthening investment in social, sustainable and affordable housing, boosting the housing supply that you were referring to, tackling energy poverty and boosting renovations, regulating the short-term rentals and fighting homelessness. But financialization is what I would like to hear more about today. As we know, financial markets play an important role in shaping housing affordability. As the main responsible commissioner on housing, what steps have you taken so far to ensure smooth cooperation and shared objectives with Commissioner Albuquerque and others in order to make sure that the affordable housing plan that you will deliver later on will also address financial issues properly? And furthermore, what specific measures are you planning to start mainstreaming housing affordability in financial services legislation? Some extra questions still. Have you already initiated a housing affordability evaluation on existing EU legislation in the area of financial services? And if not, will you be doing so later on? And also, are you committed to promoting targeted due diligence requirements for investors in the housing market? And do you plan to integrate those into the affordable housing plan as part of the financial market recommendations? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those questions. No doubt that financialization, speculation in the housing market is one of the areas where we need to really be quite thorough in our analysis, and where most likely we will be able to identify big problems. It's also very clear that I predict that this is one of the areas where we will need to have discussions on the subsidiarity principle, because some member states are saying keep your hands off, others are saying please, we need European regulation. But no doubt the financial markets are also our responsibility as a union at different levels. And that will also, of course, go for the parts that has to do with the housing sector. And yes, I am, of course, discussing this with my colleagues, several colleagues, but especially, of course, Commissioner Albuquerque. And we are also dealing with this specific area in the special commissioners working group on this issue. And I also very much look forward to participating in the dialogue with you in this committee on this exact question, just as it will be a part of the topics dealt with in my dialogue with the different parts of the housing ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Leila Chaibi for the left.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I speak French. I had several questions. First is about short-term lettings. This was a question asked by the S&D colleague. I'd like to know if you are contemplating a concrete legislative initiative on this. We've seen in Europe, in different cities around Europe, that the local councils have taken measures to reduce the number of short-term lettings, which had a beneficial effect on the supply. Rents fell and more housing was available as a result. Second element regarding cities, 12 large European cities, including a majority of capitals, have launched an appeal for an urgency plan on housing, proposing that investment in affordable housing be exempt from the Stability Pact rules, the 3%, the austerity rules, in the same way as the European Commission has just proposed for investment in defence being exempt from the 3% Maastricht criteria. If we can do it for war, should we not do it also for the right to housing for all? And I'd be interested in hearing your answer to that. Third question is on the financialization of housing. You said we have to be comprehensive in analysis before taking any measures against the financialization of housing. I have a proposal, which is that of European civil society. It's not my own idea. I'm just repeating it. Is a transparency register at European level on investment of foreign funds in housing, that in property. That would allow us to have a clear vision, a clear view of the impact of investment funds, hedge funds on rents, such as we have a transparency register here in the European Parliament for anything that might influence the decision-making in European lobbyists and so on have to be in the transparency register. Perhaps we could do the same in foreign hedge funds investing in property. That seems to me good sense. What do you think of such a proposal? Thank you.
So I did indeed meet with this group of mayors, and I think it's very, very useful to have gatherings of actually quite different cities around Europe, but that are facing the same types of problems, because they give me and you perspectives that are very, very useful. And I spoke with them last week, and will be continuing to work closely with them. And one of the areas that we also spoke about was indeed the short-term rentals. I mean, it's probably not that normal that a commissioner will say, even before the legislation that's been adopted is implemented, that we need new legislation. Nonetheless, that's more or less what I am saying. Of course, next year, when the legislation that's been passed will be implemented, that will give new tools to most countries and regions. And I do think that will lead to some positive changes also, but I don't think that will be enough. So, yes, I will be willing to do that. The next more interesting question is then, what is the content of that legislation going to be? And here I don't have clear answers for you yet. But this also means that this is your chance to influence me on that. Because best practices, good examples, bad examples, bring them onto the table, and let's use also the next months to discuss in detail what can actually be done. Again, the balances is the key word. right now I see more problems than goods out there connected to this. You always need to be mindful that often the ones having the problems are also the ones that speak the loudest. So we need to be careful that we don't make solutions that then ruin it for many cities and regions that are very dependent on these new platforms. We're talking about also how normal people have problems paying their rent. Well, for some people, having the access to actually renting out their home once in a while, that's what makes it possible for them to actually live in that home. So we don't want to take away that possibility. On the other hand, of course, as you all know, speculation in this, where people are being outcrowded of whole parts of cities and nobody can afford to live there because of short-term rentals, that is a real problem. And over-tourism is a real problem in many places. So I can definitely assure you that this is top of my agenda.
Thank you very much. Now we start our second round. 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes reply. We start with Dirk Gotting for EPP.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Good luck on this long road to discover what actually Europe can do on housing. I think many people have said very true things about the total catastrophe that is the housing market, especially for young people. But not only that, it is now simply a middle class problem all over Europe, and it touches many, many people. And we get a lot of questions from back home, from our cities and regions and voters. So when are you going to help? A place where we could help, and some people mentioned it already, is the supply side of things. Because when we talk about, for example, permitting, in especially densely populated areas, urban areas often are, but the Netherlands, for example, you have a lot of people, nature, industry, everything living together on the same square meters. And a lot of European regulations, often to do with our environmental regulations, soil, water, air, you name it, there's a regulation. Is there a plan to sort of look at the permitting procedures throughout Europe, whether this is something that we can build on, how we can make it faster? Because I'm very hesitant on demand-side policies, which often tend to drive up prices also of the houses. Very well-intended policies, but often lead to higher housing prices. What can we do really on the supply side to speed up building of houses in the member states? Thank you.
The issue of permitting is definitely one that we will need to look at. You may have seen that in the Affordable Energy Action Plan that the Commission presented, that I presented last week. This is one of the areas where we are proposing to fast-track permitting. No doubt that most of the legislation made that are today prolonging these processes were made for good reasons. We want to take care of our environment, obviously. We want to be able to control city planning, obviously, all of these things. But on the other hand, if we look at how much delay permitting rules leads to, we do have a problem. I have to be quite frank and say that I know more about this on the energy side than I do on the housing side. On the energy side, we have a clear problem, and we're now addressing it. So I want to use this process also to find out how big is the problem on permitting. To be quite frank, and this is not, I'm not neglecting what you're saying at all, sir, but to be quite frank, I haven't heard that many people bringing it to my table. Netherlands, certainly, yes, your minister's also been in my office. So I'd be very interested to hear also from, I'm sure it must be a problem also in other countries. And even if it isn't, you don't only have to solve problems that are problems in all countries. You can also solve them if they're only exactly. But nonetheless, if they are a problem many other places, please let us know. We will look into it ourselves also, of course. But just to say that input here is very, very welcome.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Alicia Holmes-Ginel for S&D.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta, Comisario.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One is that tourism is very important, and regions like mine, this sector is very important, but it also have negative effects when it gets out of hand. And we also know how important is access to decent housing. And that has led to the debate we're having in this commission on the increase in short-term rentals, which we know are not helping in regards to the housing problem. We'd like to know if the European Commission is contemplating the possibility of of having these short-term lets tax, because we know that it's a business and be treated as such. And then there's also this idea of capping rents at European level, and looking at the results that have been had in places like Barcelona. Are you contemplating creating a legal framework for capping rents? And finally, I'd like you to take into account the youngest generation in the European response to this, because they're the ones who are suffering the most.
Yes, so on the short-term rentals and taxation, that is certainly one of the possible ways of dealing with this problem. Some countries are also doing that. They're deploying tax rules differently on this. There are, of course, single market rules on proportionality and things like that, but it is one of the areas that we will look into as possible solutions.
Okay, now we have concluded the second round, but we have a third round based on Catch the Eye, and I have already 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people registered and 10 minutes.
Easy.
So I can group them in 3 groups of 4 questions. If you ask the questions 20, 30 seconds, I take 4 questions and I give the floor for the answer, 4 questions and I give the floor for the answer. Please go straight with the question, 20 seconds, and then we can try to make it. I'm trying to accommodate everybody. I understand the strong interest in the topic. Let's start with Regina Doherty for EPP. 20 seconds.
Thanks, Commissioner. I met a developer in Dublin last week and he tells me that bats and snails have more right to homes in Ireland than people do. So I want to know definitively what you're going to do with regard to our EU directives that are blocking young people, old people, middle-aged people like me from being able to get a house.
Thank you very much. Isenelle Kalinek, still from EPP.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je me permettrai d'insister.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask specifically about financing. So we've talked about attracting public and private investment and the support of the European Investment Bank. Who will be the beneficiaries of the platform? Who is going to benefit? Social partners, private investors, national banks? Are we talking about financing new properties, renovating properties, both? And what exactly would the time frame be for putting in place this platform, and when will we find out? Thank you.
Now Barry Cohen for Renew.
Thank you. In Ireland, we have 3 primary obstacles remain in relation to housing development: state aid rules, planning, permitting, and not enough private development. If I concentrate on planning, or permitting as you call it, in planning, although it's a national competency, we have issues whereby developments initially awarded permission to construct, and having been subject to having satisfied various criteria, policy, legislation, EU directives, ensuring best practice with regards to zoning, density, design, access to infrastructure, amenities and services, as provided in development plans, which are extensively agreed after much public consultation. But if permission is subject to appeal, or permitting is subject to appeal, they can be stalled by the courts all the way to the European courts, and can in some instances take up to 5 years to resolve. That is simply criminal. So I am asking, you mentioned European best practices. I would ask you, or encourage you, or implore you to be in a position to make recommendations in relation to best practices regarding permitting, whereby appeals must be curtailed on timelines, whereby courts must be cut out of the planning process in order to ensure that even if it's for a specific time or a sunset clause, to cater for the emergency that is now and allow that emergency be judged on those instances and those rectifications to see if success can be claimed having done that.
Okay, thank you. Now, Nora Mebarek for S&D.
Monsieur le commissaire, ça va être très simple.
Well, it's going to be a very simple question. I share a lot of comments that have already been made, and I think it's clear that we need to legislate. So what exactly, or when exactly rather, are you going to table legislative proposals? Thank you.
Commissioner, you have 2-3 minutes to answer, and then we have the second round.
Yeah, so for the last question, when will I be putting something forward? So for me, the planning of this has been a bit of a dilemma, because on one hand, I do see this as a very urgent topic, and I do think that people expect us to act fast. On the other hand, I can probably also, I would assume that if I just pretended that this committee did not exist, and I don't care what you will conclude in a year from now, probably you would also voice some criticism. So what to do? Well, what I've decided to do is that I will put forward my plan for affordable housing after you put forward your recommendations, so that I can actually listen to your recommendations. But I will not wait with everything 1 year for that. So I will be working on the issues that I already mentioned, the doubling of the cohesion, the state aid rules, and other things. So there will be things going on in parallel. I hope you will support that. I don't really see any other way, but that's how I will do it. Then on the bats and snails, I probably will steal that one. I think that's a good example. Although I will say that there's probably also other committees in this House where actually bats and snails are considered pretty important. And I'm sure you will think so also. So again, this is a question of balance. I would really encourage you all to look at what we proposed last week on the energy side. I'm actually a little bit surprised that it hadn't caught more attention, because it's quite substantial. We're saying that in the energy side, often we have 7, 8, 9, 10 years of time spans for giving permits. We want to reduce that to 6 months for most cases, and not over 2 years for complicated cases. Now, can something similar be done in the housing sector? I don't know. This is what we will look into, but I think you can take that as a signal that me and Commissioner for Environment and other responsible commissioners, we are definitely not in opposition to people who say that we need to make these things faster. There are different ways of doing this, of course. One is looking into best practices of how existing rules are being implemented differently, because there are big differences. Germany is a good example of a country that's doing very well on the permitting side with existing rules in the energy sector. They've managed to cut the times 2/3, I think it is, in average. And I assume, we don't have the data yet, but I assume that will also be the case within housing. So when it's within existing rules, we can act now. What's more difficult is, of course, if we need to change rules. I'm more than willing to do that if it is necessary, but you then more than, at least as good as me, you know that then means legislative process going through this House also, with probably also some pretty big fights involved there. Maybe that's necessary. Maybe we need to do both. Too early to conclude, but I'm definitely willing to. On the actual way that the Pan-European Investment Platform will work and the span of it is too early for me to say yet, but we will very soon be presenting the first steps with the EIB that will address the questions that you asked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second group of Catch the Eye, we start with Maravilla Badia Hover for EPP.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. We've already seen a lot of the problems that we have in a lot of European countries. Our housing plans are affected by town planning, which is caught up in a lot of bureaucratic processes. It means that there are local areas and regions that can't promote building houses in their regions. So I wonder what you will do to help local and regional governments so it's easier for them to help design their cities. Thank you.
Yes, ahora Georgios Aftias for EPP. 20 seconds before we ask.
I will talk to Greek. Κύριε Επίτροπε, ευχαριστώ για την απάντηση. 17 Φεβρουαρίου ήταν πολύ εμπεριστατωμένη.
Thank you for the answer you gave me on the 17th of February, which was very good, but I have a couple of questions. The EIB is going to be involved into the situation, and the European Social Fund, and the ERFRD. But my question is, my country, Greece, gets 2 billion from Europe and 1 billion from the banks for the housing program. Does this mean that that the countries that will make use of the banking sector and EU funds will get double as much funding?
Now, Maria Zaccaria for the non-screen.
Thank you. In my opinion, we need to safeguard the right to housing for citizens, to drive down short-term rentals, to stop golden visas where we have individual third countries investing in the EU, protect people's primary residences, and ban the servicers' activity in terms of primary residences. I have a proposal to make that has been implemented in Greece since 1954. There was this social housing institution that provided residences to pensioners and working people, and it was not further placing a burden on the budget. It constructed very cheap residences to beneficiaries or gave out loans with small interest rates and subsidized rents for poor people. Please, your question. And it also created some residential plans for. Is this a proposal that you can get along with?
I need to collect all the questions because we really have no time, and we have the Executive Vice President Vicent Marza for the Greens.
Gracias, Presidenta. Señor Comisario, ha pedido consensos en esta materia.
Thank you very much. You've talked about consensus, and we had 90% of the European Economic and Social Committee talking about a lower interest, more public investment, for example, and not having public debt incurred in this way. So what are the measures you're going to put in place?
Thank you. Dan Jordan for S&D.
Thank you. Good to talk to you again, Commissioner. Just very briefly on the issue of homelessness, and I was delighted that you mentioned that in your open remarks. In Ireland, 10 years ago, there was 900 homeless children. Now there's almost 5,000 homeless children. And the Commission's 2024 report on Ireland highlighted that weak tenant protections are a key driver of homelessness in Ireland. So what can the Commission do to bolster tenant rights across the EU to stop this flow of families, and particularly children, into homelessness?
Thank you very much. Marco Falcone, EPP.
Presidente, velocemente, io ho ascoltato e apprezzato l'impostazione del commissario.
I've listened carefully to the Commissioner now, and the challenges with the timing. Now, what can be done for the rural and insular areas, for islands, and for residential policy in the historic centres of cities? And I'd like to mention also the public held lands and estates.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear Commissioner, good to see you, good to hear you. In the last 10 years, housing costs has been 60% higher in Portugal. So since you left this European Parliament, our house has got 60% more expensive, okay? We have the income price to income ratio in the OECD for my country is 36% higher than the OECD average and 50% higher than the Eurozone average. So we have a problem. My question is very simple. Can I give a timeline to my voters about the European strategy for housing construction or about the European Affordable Housing Plan? Can I give them dates, hope, numbers, a future in a near time? And
Thank you. I'm sorry, we need to cut. Rosa Estaras, EPP. I apologize.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. Thank you very much to the Commissioner. My question is with regards to market intervention, controlling prices and helping with the offers. That's what happened in Catalonia. The Bank of Spain explained what was being done. It is an issue to intervene in the market and to affect prices. What is your view on that? Do you agree that we should be freeing up land, reducing prices, reducing bureaucracy? Thank you.
Antonella Sberna, ECR, and then we close.
Grazie Presidente, Commissario, grazie per la sua... Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. I have a question. During this period, like many of us, we have seen a lot of categories who are concerned with this issue. I'm talking here about Italy, but in many other European cities, there are historic medieval cities who are also feeling this impact. Then there's the difference between rentals and landlords. So we need to look at where the burden lies here. So my question is, with regards to what you were saying about the legislative processes, we all know this is very complex. Do you see any flexibility in introducing financial instruments to support member states? And how will the Commission ensure that there isn't too much red tape for citizens? Thank you.
Commissioner.
Okay, thank you all so much for this dialogue, the first of hopefully many. Many of you I know beforehand and have met, others is the first time. I want you to know that I really appreciate this, and you're always welcome to reach out to me or my team. I do understand impatience from you, sir, and others. I share it. This is also why I am also searching for things that we can do that work fast. The problem with things that we can do that work fast is that does not then include legislation and things that then really lead to structural changes. So I'm asking you to help me pointing to those things. What can we do that is short term, that can work fast, that can be implemented tomorrow, whilst at the same time putting in place the structural changes that we need to solve this problem for real long term. This is not an easy task, obviously, and it's even more complicated in this issue than it is in so many other issues that we deal with, because of the subsidiarity principle on this issue. Many countries will say that Brussels, keep your hands away. I have to say, though, that it's not been, when I've spoken to ministers from member states, they've been more positive than I had thought, actually. Some of them say keep your hands off, but most of them are actually very willing to engage, wanting European help. So that's the good news. So I apologize for not being able to answer all of the questions in such short time, but as I said, hopefully this is the first of many. We've noted all of your ideas and questions, obviously, and we'll take them further on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is no more time. I also have to cut my conclusions, but thank you for our availability. We are all here. We are just at the beginning of the process. I know some member states hands off, but then when they need money, they all come here. So I think it's about time to say, we are not an ATM machine. We are here to think about solutions, analyze problems with open mind and with the contribution of all of us. So thank you very much, Commissioner. And just 2 minutes to allow Executive Vice President Fitto to be here. Dear colleagues, please take a seat. Okay. So, welcome, Executive Vice President Fitto. On behalf of the Special Committee on the Housing Crisis in the European Union, I really warmly welcome you to this important exchange of views. As Executive Vice President for Growth and Cohesion, you oversee crucial policy areas that directly impact our capacity to address the housing crisis across Europe. The coordination of cohesion policy, regional development funds, and the Recovery and Resilience Facility provides essential instruments for supporting affordable and sustainable housing solutions. Your role in ensuring that these various funding streams work together coherently is particularly relevant to our committee's mandate. Recent data shows that the housing crisis is not just a social challenge, but also an economic one that affects the Union's growth potential. Our committee is particularly interested in understanding how we can better utilize existing Union's funding instruments to support housing initiatives. The European Regional Development Fund, the Cohesion Fund, and the Recovery and Resilience Facility all have significant potential to address housing challenges. As we look towards the next multi-annual financial framework, your insights on how we might strengthen these instruments will be invaluable. We are also keen to explore how housing investments can contribute to broader Union's objectives, including territorial cohesion and sustainable urban development. The disparities in housing challenges between regions and between urban and rural areas make this a crucial aspect of cohesion policy. Your perspective on how we can ensure a balanced approach that addresses these territorial dimensions will be particularly valuable. So, Executive Vice President, we look forward to a productive discussion that will help inform our committee's work. You have the floor for 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, dear Irene, honourable members. Thank you for this invitation. I welcome the creation of this special committee on housing. Housing is one of the most important challenges we face as a union today. It is a challenge that involves all different income levels, generations and geographical areas of the EU. The European Parliament plays a crucial role, and I look forward to a constructive dialogue with you in the coming weeks and months. To avoid repeating what my colleague Commissioner Jørgensen correctly mentioned regarding the strategic importance of the first European Affordable Housing Plan, I would like to focus on two main instruments under my responsibility. First is cohesion and second is RRF. In my mission letter, President von der Leyen entrusted me to ensure that Europe delivers concrete support and investment for member states, regions, local authorities and citizens, promoting economic and social convergence across the EU. Housing is central to this goal. Cohesion policy already plays a key role in supporting housing. In the current programming period, we are investing 7.5 billion euros in housing through 4 cohesion policy funds. With the national co-financing, the total investment reaches 10.5 billion euro. This support focuses mainly on 2 crucial areas: energy efficiency, improving the energy performance of homes across Europe not only benefits the environment, but also results in lower energy bills for families. This is particularly important in today's environment of high energy prices and insecurity about future costs. Second, social housing, the building of new housing units and the renovation of existing ones to ensure support for low-income families and special needs. But we need to do more, not only in the next MFF, but also right now, in the current programming periods. The mid-term review of cohesion policy. This is the perfect opportunity to adjust and align investments with emerging needs, as well as with the key European priorities, including affordable housing, expanding access to quality and affordable homes for all, the right to stay, ensuring citizens can live and work in the place they call home, and the agenda for cities, a strategic approach to urban challenges and opportunities. This is why I'm written to every Minister for Cohesion Policy and why I'm meeting them as well as the regional and the managing authorities both in Brussels and in my missions to the Member States. During these discussions, one of the key points of the agenda is affordable housing and the doubling of housing investments. But we must be realistic. Demand cannot be met only with EU funds and grants. More public and private investment must be mobilized. This is why we are working closely with the European Investment Bank to unlock additional financing for housing. Housing will play a central role not only in the mid-term review, but also in the future of cohesion policy. We are aware that we cannot afford to maintain the status quo. The world has changed, and the cohesion policy must change with it. On the issue of affordable housing, for example, cohesion policy will also have to evolve and recognize that the housing challenges in rural areas or islands are very different from the specific needs of urban areas. Different situations require tailor-made solutions. Housing is a prime example, but the need to modernize policy goes beyond these issues. We need to adapt it to the future challenges, ensuring that it remains impactful, responsive and fit for the future. On the resilience and the recovery facility, has supported the key reforms and investment in housing that increase access to quality and affordable housing. 20.3 billion euros has been dedicated to housing. We have seen many examples across the member states that show how the RFF is making a real impact, often in close collaboration with the regions and the municipalities. Our common goal is clear: to make affordable housing a reality across all regions, supported by a reinforced and relaunched cohesion policy. To achieve this, working together is crucial. Your ideas and input will be vital as we move forward to find solutions that drive real change. Thank you and look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you very much. We start our round of questions. The first round, let me remind you, you have 1.5 minutes for the question and 3 minutes reply by Executive Vice President. We start with the EPP, Nicolina Brunjak.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice President Fitto. And thank you for being here with us again. So, as you said, the housing crisis in the European Union is affecting millions of families and young people, and the European economy and social model are under a strain, and Europeans are facing high housing, energy and food prices. Lack of quality jobs, opportunity, high cost of living increase the risk of brain drain and the depopulation in many European regions. How can we expect a more competitive Europe if we don't solve the problem which is weighing on our citizens' daily existence? Cohesion policy fundings must tackle demographic change and depopulation. So the EPP firmly believes that existing EU funds, particularly in ERDF, which you mentioned, must be used more strategically to finance affordably energy-efficient housing and urban development while reducing regional disparities. Our priority is therefore improving the market for affordable and accessible housing for low and middle-income households, with a special focus on ensuring that families with children and young people, as well as women and mothers, have access to affordable, energy-efficient and high-quality housing. I think we can agree that cohesion policy must play a central role in addressing housing shortages and ensuring equal opportunities across all regions. More importantly, there is no time to waste because we are at the risk of losing our young people in all our regions. Can you tell us how the Commission plans to speed up financing for affordable housing in the current multi-annual framework? And how does the Commission plan to simplify the procedures and ensure the faster, more flexible allocation of fundings for affordable housing in the next MFF? Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that it's important to give a clear answer immediately. For this reason, I said before during my introduction that our work now is to organize a meeting with all governments because we have a golden opportunity now. The opportunity is the midterm review of the current programs of cohesion policy. It's important to underline that these programs were decided from 2019-2021 and were signed in 2022, are starting now. The midterm review, in my opinion, in our opinion, is a great opportunity to adapt this program at the new priorities. And one of these priorities is housing. And in the first meetings that I'm having with all member states, but not all member states, but it's important also to involve the regions, the cities, the local authorities. It's an important point is to give at these priorities an important role. I believe that it's possible to work in this direction, and the midterm review, I'm convinced that could be an important opportunity to give an immediate answer about this point.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Andreas Schieder for S&D.
Yeah, thank you, Vice President, to be with us here, and thank you what you already said in your introduction. And as you mentioned, also the huge amount of cohesion money which should be directed to housing. I have one question is how you will ensure that also the member states are then coming after and doubling this investment into affordable housing. Secondly, like this liquidity is injected into the market, how you will ensure that it's not feeding speculation, but on the other side is ensuring affordable housing which is provided to the middle and low income groups. And last question, what measures will you take to link the right to stay and the access to affordable housing, especially for vulnerable groups?
Yes, I think that the midterm review will be an opportunity to give this answer. Why? Because it's possible to share with the member states these priorities. Our idea is to share with the member state, and the meetings that we are having now is in this direction, to share the priorities and also to share the measures to put inside the midterm review. And I believe that this opportunity will be fundamental to guarantee this approach and to share with all member states. But for this reason, I want to underline an important point. During my first missions in these first weeks, I met, yes, in the member states, the national authorities, it's clear, but in all missions, I met the representative of the other authorities, regional, president of regions, and mayors, because this is important to have this multi-level approach. This is a fundamental in the cohesion policy, and I believe that this is an important point to have this guarantee about the points that you said before. And the other issues is an important approach for the different areas. I said in my introduction that we have two different approaches. One is the urban areas and the other is the internal rural areas. It's important to have the same approach general, but a tailor-made approach about the solution. And we have now an important question under the cohesion policy as a priority, because we have the 75% of the European citizens that live in the urban areas, in the cities. And we have the overpopulation and the consequence of this problem. And we have at the same time, in the internal rural areas, the problem of the depopulation. It's two phases of the same problem. It's important to give a common answer, but it's important to create under the midterm review the solution about two different approaches.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Antonella Sberna for ECR.
Vicepresidente, bentornato.
President, welcome back to our first meeting of the House Special Committee. First of all, thank you for what you mentioned about the management funds, specifically the cohesion policy. The work that you are carrying out is essential to ensure that the resources that the EU has have an impact, particularly when it comes to businesses and consumers. Today we are faced with a significant challenge. Housing affects European citizens, and the situation is particularly complex. We've already had a discussion with Commissioner Jørgensen, and we would like to launch a European plan for affordable housing. Now, having funds under the cohesion policy is clearly a step in the right direction, but I have a question. What timeline is foreseen for these announcements, which are obviously essential? And then it's also important to combine innovative instruments, ensuring public guarantees and incentives for sustainable investments. We need to strike a balance between accessibility and sustainability when it comes to investments. So, do we think that the European model is following this direction? And will it be able to follow the best practices already being implemented by certain member states? Thank you. Thank you. Now, when it comes to the timeline of the work that we are carrying out at the Commission, as you heard before me, the other commissioner with whom I am working with, he has a specific competence for housing. But with regards to my competences and the timeline of the midterm review, this might be quite short. We need to listen to other member states, but I think we're at a good point. And after meeting with the member states, we then need to identify priorities. So I've spoken about the regional policies, but the midterm review is a link between member states and the Parliament. And so when we talk about the time frame for housing, I think the Parliament should play a very important role here. So it's important that the Parliament always be informed, specifically this special committee, and then we can include any suggestions that you might have, and that can help us further in our work. Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Barry Cohen for Renew.
Cohesion and reform in relation to developing our regions are vital to the potential in less populated regions. And you're right to mention the issue of energy potential. In the Midlands and West Coast, we have the Atlantic and West Coast. There's the potential to develop 70 gigawatts of power and potentially another 50 if wave energy projects materialise. That can power up to 40 million homes throughout Europe. That's a pan-European project that needs to be taken on board by the Commission, not only to meet the needs of our region and our country, but the potential to explore the ambition which can be derived in Europe and address the cruel dependency we were exposed to in relation to Russian gas. And it's that type of development which in turn will lead to private development in housing to meet the needs associated with the onset of industry, business and commerce in those regions. And that's the sort of joined-up thinking I would hope that this Commission will ensure, together with your colleague in housing, is paramount and pivotal to infrastructure development to meet the issue of competitiveness, which Draghi mentioned, is the cruel factor that is impinging Europe's ability to compete, whereby the US has energy 5 times less expensive than ours. And I implore you to address this issue, please.
Yes, I fully agree with you. I share your approach, your suggestion. I believe that it's important to work in this direction, and it's important to have an important, strong involvement of the European Investment Bank in this way, because it's crucial to enlarge our vision, not only with grant resources of European Commission, but it's important to have this capacity to involve also other instruments. This is the particular approach, profile of the role of the Commissioner Jørgensen, because, as I said before, my role is to create the condition to adapt cohesion policy at this new priority, but also at this point it's important to adjust the current program, but in particular to create a condition for the next MFF, because the debate that we have now is for the midterm review of the current programs, and can be an important moment to create this condition. But as you know, we are working for the next MFF. It's important to create this important connection, and I believe that we need a flexibility about these measures, because it's important also to have this availability to give this clear, strong answer immediately, because this point are news in this debate, and it's important to not to wait some years, because it's impossible to wait some years. It's fundamental to have this important flexibility and to give immediately this kind of answer. This is our work, and thank you for your suggestion, but I repeat, I fully agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gordon Bosanak for the Greens.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And I really appreciate how you are emphasizing this golden opportunity of midterm review, like it's now or never to do something. And it's actually on the member states to make a step forward and to change their operational plan. So my first question to you is, do you have the first feedback? Are they doing that or not? And maybe to make aware of my colleagues, MEPs, that now it's really the time of us to press the member states to change operational plan. But if the member states will change the operational plan and request and put housing high as a priority, are you also ready to change legislation? So, you know, the current regulation on the ERDF has this famous, and the Cohesion Fund, has famous Article 7.5, exclusions of the using the money. The Cohesion Fund shall not support investments in housing, etc. So, if there will be high priority, are you also then ready to change this to unlock the Cohesion Fund also for housing, investment in affordable housing, but also not to unlock it fully, so that we are sure that this money will, for example, go directly to the affordable housing of the, I don't know, cities and regions to build the new housing stock. So is the Commission preparing some legislational changes to be in compliance with the request of the member states that housing is a priority at the moment? Thank you.
Yes, one point is the midterm review. As you know well, because you are in the Regi Committee, and this opportunity is in the hand of the member states. But the idea of the European Commission is to push in this direction and to create this opportunity. I can update you about the first meetings, and I can say that the first meetings are very positive. The approach is in general open about from the member state, and I believe that we'll have a great opportunity to arrive at these results. It's not simple, but I repeat that until now the first approach is very positive, because I want to underline one point. The current programs, as I said before, were decided 3, 4, 5 years ago, and we are starting now. I think that the logical approach is to adapt these programs to the new priorities, and this is one of these. I think that could be possible also some legislative change if we have an agreement with the member states, because you said one important point, but we have probably the opportunity also to verify some other legislative change in this direction to adapt and to give immediately solution the questions that we say now. We'll see. This is our work, but I'm convinced that it's possible, and I'm confident about this work. We'll see in the next 2 weeks, because it's clear the midterm review, it's possible to give to have an important contribution also only if we give an immediately answer, because the deadline is now, and the opportunity to adapt all programs is in these next 2 months, not in these years. This is an important point. And repeat, I'm confident, and I believe that it's possible to arrive at this solution. But the involvement with the member states is fundamental, and it's fundamental also to share with the member states. But the last point is that about cohesion, my experience says that we have sometimes many voices. It's important to have only one voice with an important coordination, and it's important to share the priorities. And housing, in my opinion, and I am here to confirm this, it's an important, one of the most important priorities.
Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to Irene Montero for the left.
Gracias, Presidenta, Vicepresidenta.
Thank you, Chair. Vice President, if it's important that everyone has the right to housing, food and water, but the problem here is speculation, and this is part of the problem. Speculators in Europe have been given the red carpet to illegally grab houses. For example, in Spain, 10 large speculators own a vast amount of housing. In 10 years' time, the young people in my country will have 10% less of purchasing power when it comes to buying homes. This is inciting hatred amongst others, because many foreign homeowners are coming in and stealing homes from Europeans. Vice President, I'd like to ask you, why are we not using the half of housing when it comes to investment funds? We must give houses to locals, and this also works hand in hand with the energy market. We mustn't evict people without giving them alternatives. We must guarantee the right to housing. But to do that, we need to stop housing being a business. Thank you.
Sì, grazie. Parto da un dato. Come...
Thank you. I'd like to start off with some figures. We are all subject to member states, but I can say that I've only been in this role for a few weeks now, and I think that we are working in the right direction. Now, I think the objective here is to create conditions to increase investment in order to give a clear response. As I said, the Cohesion Fund is working in this direction, but we need to look at the positive investments that have been made, and there are many examples that can be identified, particularly when it comes to the RRF. So I think we need to be constructive. And in terms of my role, I am here to collaborate and work with you, and I look forward to receiving constructive contributions so that we can work together. Thank you.
Our second round of questions. Let me remind you, you have 1 minute for the question and then 2 minutes for the reply. I give the floor to Marco Falcone for EPP.
Thank you, Chair. Signor Vicepresidente.
Vice President, you mentioned a multi-level approach between Europe and member states. And I think that this is an appropriate, useful, and interesting approach. However, if we want housing, if we think housing is essential for all families, we need to look at financial policies. You mentioned reviewing the cohesion policy, but I have a specific question. What measures can be implemented with European financing that go beyond state aid so that we can help families, particularly single-income families, so that we can avoid overpopulation, or rather depopulation, in rural areas? As I said earlier, we need to look at the facts. When it comes to cohesion policy and the RRF, we're talking here about 30 billion euros. That's not enough, but at the same time, it's not exactly peanuts. We need to look at conditions here, and the EIB is a very important instrument. It can have secondary effects when it comes to using these resources, and if it is used strategically, like I said in an answer earlier, this is two sides of the same coin. We've got the great issue here of cities and urban areas, where the vast majority of citizens live. But then we have this overpopulation, and that causes a lot of organizational issues when it comes to services. And again, housing is part of this. But then at the same time, we've got more isolated areas, and they require more coordinated measures from the cohesion policy so that we can give a complete answer. We need to look at infrastructure, services, and housing. Something I want to underscore here is related to the work that we are carrying out over the next few weeks, which is the cities agenda. I think Chair Tinan, you mentioned this earlier, but this could be a time to together look at how we can include this policy agenda in our work. I think that would be very important. Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Marco Vesli-Gai for S&D.
Thank you, and thank you, Vice President Fitto, for joining us today. I would like to address two cases and hear your maybe more concrete plans to deal with them. The first issue is of youth housing, and the second is the housing in rural areas. I just presented a research which we did in Croatia, which showed that 70% of the young people are unable to afford housing, and other statistics shows that the situation is equally bad across Europe. This research also showed that large majority, over 60%, expect concrete measures to address this. Second topic is rural housing and the overall rural development, which can be seen as a potential to solve the housing issues we are facing. If we invest in rural areas, we can attract more people into these areas and thus maximize rural potential. Here we need to be aware of the crucial role of the local authorities for housing potential. I urge you not to leave the rural communities out of the new housing framework. I'm very glad that you are mentioned a few times the importance of these areas and their development, and I appeal to you to implement the youth test across all measures you plan to put forward. I think it's the only way we will truly make sure that our EU citizens has a roof over their head. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you, and for me it's important to underline another important point in the vision of agriculture and food for the next 5 years, together with Commissioner Hansen. As you know, in my executive vice president, we have in my cluster the coordination about agriculture, tourism, transport, fisheries, and blue economy. A common vision about all these matters can be an important solution about this point. And in rural areas, this is fundamental. In this vision, we underlined exactly this point. There is an important part dedicated to the rural areas. And in our approach of cohesion policy, I convinced that this is an important point for the future, because if we want to give a strong answer about the differences that we have, to reduce the differences, and this is the first point of the cohesion policy, it's fundamental to go in this way, to create a different approach in the rural areas and the islands. And we have also different situations. For example, I went in one of my missions in Finland to Lapparanta, at the border with Russia. The external border regions is a full difference that the south of Spain or Italy or Greece. But it's important to have the common approach, but a different solutions, a tailor-made solution, because we have in the internal rural areas different situations. But I fully agree with you about this approach, and I confirm that it's fundamental for us, for the European Commission, to give this solution. And I want to remember that this is an important priority of the guidelines of President von der Leyen.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we start the third round, which is based on Catch the Eye. I have many requests, but we do have some time if you stay in the time. So we have like 1 minute each for both a question and answer. So I would like to give you the floor individually, not like before where I had to group in 4, but please stay in the time. Jana Tum, Renew. Tom.
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, more or less everything which I wanted to ask was already asked, but if I'm not mistaken, you did not mention public-private partnership. How do you see their role in injecting liquidity into the housing market? You also mentioned close cooperation with European Central Bank and Investment Bank. Can you please elaborate a bit on that? And my main concern is, to be honest, this is a huge promise we're making by creating this committee and by what was promised by Ursula von der Leyen. We have some success stories, of course, but we also have some not so successful stories here. So I have a very personal question. on the scale from 1 to 10, how optimistic is Vice President Fitto on this task? Thank you.
But in general, I am optimistic. But in this case, it's important to be realistic, also to be realistic. It's not a simple challenge, but I believe that if we work together in the same direction, it's possible to have positive solutions, to give a positive answer in this direction. I believe that the work that we are making now about the midterm review can be an important step in this direction. And also the work that Commissioner Jørgensen for the all measures inside the plan of housing could be another important opportunities. And we are starting now with this approach, this new approach, and I am confident that it's possible to arrive at important results. And for me, it's very important, this committee, because can be an important instrument to push in this direction. It's necessary to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Isabelle Le Kalinek for EPP.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. In an EPRS study, no less than 14 instruments are mentioned: the RRF, the ERDF, the Cohesion Fund, the ESF+, the GDF, InvestEU, Horizon Europe, TSE, the Single Market Programme, AMIF, Social Climate Fund, Modernisation Fund, LIFE Programme, a facility, and then the EIB. Do you not think that some of these funds should be streamlined or merged? Because I think that all of these funds are more burdensome. Do you intend to evolve the access criteria to these funds and simplify access to them in general? Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you, because your list of funds is a clear answer about the needs that we have to change this approach. And we have an important opportunity in this commission, because, as you know, we have a commission for simplification. We are working, last week we approved the first proposal in this way, and I believe that in the new approach and the modernization of cohesion policy, it's possible, it's necessary to create a different solution, because also under cohesion policy it's necessary to have a common vision, to have a simplification. But about this issue of housing, it's important to make this work with all other funds, and I agree with you.
Thank you very much. Regina Doherty for EPP.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner. There's plenty of countries across the EU are struggling to build houses because we're delayed by regulatory burdens, the high cost of materials, etc. The planning process is kind of grinding to a halt because of some of our regulations. So I know competency lies with the Member States, but the European single market plays a real big role in how much materials cost, the quality standards that we have, the supply chains and the access to finance. So I'm wondering, in the next 6 to 12 months, what are the concrete steps that the Commission is going to take to unburden the regulatory process, to make sure that we have the best priced cost materials that we can across the EU, and not to add unnecessary costs to the overall process?
These problems, as you said, is a problem of the Member States. It's in general. I think that it's possible to give the priorities with the Member States, to share this common approach, common vision, to try to go in this way. And this is our priorities and our approach, but it will be fundamental to share with the Member States these solutions, and For my side, about my responsibility, I believe that could be possible to start well with the midterm review of cohesion programs, because it could be a solution not only to give more resources, but it's possible also at the same time to can imagine some legislative changes in this direction. We'll see, but it will be fundamental to share with the member states.
Okay, thank you very much. Now Isilda Gomez, SND.
Senhor Vice-Presidente, muito obrigada. Há pouco fez aqui uma afirmação que também foi feita pelo seu anterior colega quando esteve.
Now, other speakers have talked about the fact that housing is a competence of the member states. But we should acknowledge that in some member states, 2% of the housing is built by the public authorities, and in other member states, 30%. So it can't be a matter solely for the member states to decide. The last government had 2 billion spent 2 billion euro from the RFF on housing, and I was responsible for this for housing in my city, and I signed contracts so that more housing was built in my area. But that shows that it's only with European assistance that the targets, the cohesion cohesion targets can be achieved. Because cohesion also means equality among citizens. So my question is, are there plans in place for more flexibility regarding investments and the release of funds from the cohesion funds? Those are also European funds. Could they not be used for housing purposes? Could we not have some flexibilization or even create incentives? Can you see to creating this possibility? Thank you.
Parto da quello che stiamo facendo già.
It's part of what we're already doing now in terms of the cohesion policy. So this flexibility, this possibility is something we're trying to set up in relation to in coordination with the competence of the member states, but trying to get resources into those areas. Regarding strike, it's a question of strike and balance. And as the question of the RFF is different because that measure was a problem of reforms, investments, which was coordinated by the European Commission with a whole dynamic which is different from the ordinary funds. But if you want my view, having played the role of cohesion minister for the RFF up to last year, I think that some elements of the governance there from the RFF could also be used in some aspects of this in order to speed up the expenditure in terms of some types of investment. We can look to that in the future.
Bugalo, APP.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice President, good to see you again. My questions are very simple because most of the good questions have been made already. You've mentioned some legislative changes in order to address this issue. Can you give us an example? As you know, our country, Portugal, is living a deep housing crisis at the moment. So to give positive answers back to my voters, back to our citizens, it's really important to keep the European flame alive, the European hope alive. So you mentioned some legislative changes. Can you give us one example for me to go back home and tell our citizens? And then I have to ask if there's a possibility for the European Regional Development Fund to have a broader framework regarding the possibility of financing social and affordable housing. You've mentioned, and I think you're totally right, that we should have the same approach but tailor-made solutions. But how can we define an operative concept of affordable housing when we all have different concepts of affordable housing in our member states? Thank you.
I said before that I'm meeting all ministers, and for example, with the minister of the Portuguese government, I had a meeting some days ago, and we are starting in this work. I believe that it's possible to adapt the current programs at these new priorities like this, and I hope that will be possible to close this agreement to give this answer also in your country. I believe that it's possible, and the meeting with all ministers in general, but in particular in this case, was very positive, and I'm confident that it's possible to give this solution.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor Daniel Buda, EPP.
Mulțumesc, doamna președinte, mulțumesc, domnule comisar. Câteva realități pe care nu le putem ignora, domnule comisar. Potrivit OCDE...
Thank you. According to the OECD, we had a rise in the price of housing, 37% over the last 5 years. Wages haven't kept pace. And at the same time, last year in Romania, in France, but also in Germany, the number of planning permissions has declined sharply. So what are your conclusions? What are our conclusions? There has been an increase in housing costs, but there's also been an increase in bureaucracy in terms of delivering planning permission. So you can't say that this is a national competence because the member states have just failed in this. So that is why we're talking about housing today, because if the member states had done their job, then the situation would be different. So as to solutions, I want to emphasize one aspect, which is the need not to lose sight of public-private partnerships with cities, with local authorities, to develop infrastructure. Question: access is very important in terms of sites that could be used for business.
Sono d'accordo, ma
I agree, but it's clear that the competence still remains with the member states. So we have to try and find a solution to in the same direction as the member states. There's no other way. But at the same time, I think that activating public-private partnerships is, by arrangement with the member states, could represent a good solution in that direction. We would have to confirm how the investments would be organized and so on, but in all the meetings I've had up to now, no member state, I still haven't met all of them, but almost all of them at this stage, almost all governments have been very open and aware as to how important a response is. So we have to work in this direction.
Grazie. Diputada Staras.
Sí, gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I come from the Mallorca and the Balearic Islands. We have a huge problem, and that is that the police and so on and Guardia Civil can't work in Ibiza because they can't afford an apartment, and other public services too are suffering as a result in the Balearic Islands. So therefore we need some flexibility in this regard. The first thing to be done would be to simplify the bureaucracy, because with all the red tape that's there, it's very hard to change things. Second thing is that we need legal certainty, because you've a huge problem with illegal occupation in Spain. You've hundreds of thousands of squats in Spain, and this disincentivizes investment in the market. You have to also look at this matter. We also need aids for young people and for vulnerable groups such as people with disabilities. Currently in Spain, young people are leaving home at the oldest of any European country. Thank you. Thank you. Your question. about vulnerable groups and young people and disabled. That obviously needs a response, and that's in the priorities. That has to be in there. And the islands too, yes, indeed, that is a particular need. And not all islands are equal. There are examples that show that we need different approaches through size, characteristics, issues. Islands have huge potential, and we need responses to resolve the issues and the infrastructural problems if they continue to exist and support the population. We have to look at transport too, and we need to work in that direction too. In the midterm review, certainly, and in terms of the future also of the cohesion policy and budget policy.
Marza for the Greens.
Gracias, señora presidenta, señor comisario.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. In the Regional Affairs Committee, you were recently meeting various mayors who asked for specific measures in terms of for housing, and they sent you a letter where they asked two questions. To the question of borrowing for housing needs. And then the funds going directly to the regions for the housing needs. So what mechanism can you create for that? And could it be the European Urban Initiative so that the funds go directly to the cities where the housing is needed?
L'agenda per le città.
The city's agenda is one of the most important discussion points, and that we have to define the role of the cities. I said in another earlier answer, in all my jobs, I've always met the mayors and as well as the government representatives, because I feel they're essential. And in the Regional Affairs Committee too, I attended various debates. The last one during when the new president was elected, and we agreed on a common platform because the role of that group at the cities is very important. But at the moment, we don't have direct funds for the cities and the regions. But in my hearing last November, I did say that this is it's an important matter, and discussed this many times with the Regi Chair. And some programs need to be directly managed. There's something that has to be looked at together with the member states. So the city's agenda could be one way of setting priorities and highlighting then the role of the cities. And thirdly, to find a working method which would allow this to be done. So my approach to all of this is very open.
Okay, we have completed our various rounds of no? Ah. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry, there was a miscommunication. You're not done yet. So, okay. We have 3 more people. I apologize, but the break confused me. Okay.
Another debate.
Yeah. Georgios Aftias for EPP.
Dear colleague.
So, both of us have to do with islands. You're from Italy, I'm from Greece. You visited my country recently. Can you hear me? Do I need to say it again? You are an Italian. I know you have a special interest for the islands. I come from Greece. 450 islands, 14,000 kilometers of coastline. There are a lot of problems. Every year we have doctors, firemen, nurses that are transferred and they cannot find a place to stay. So the question is, beyond subsidizing the rent, can we also subsidize housing in hotels, especially during the summer months when the population of the islands grows. I know you're thinking about it because you are facing similar problems in Italy, and we heard it about Spain a while ago.
Well, thank you. I went in Greece 2 weeks ago. Was a very positive mission. During my visit, I met Prime Minister, some ministers, President of regions, but I had an important meeting with the mayors of the island and with Minister Stylianides. It was a very positive meeting, and I believe that we understand how is important, is particular the situation of your country. As you said, it's clear that the approach about the islands in your country is different than other countries, also for the islands. And when I said before that it's important to have a tailor-made approach under all matters, I wanted to say this. And your country is a clear example in this direction. But in this midterm review, but in the future of cohesion policy, will be fundamental to have an important role about the islands. And as I said before, also for the questions about Mallorca and Spain, I believe that it's fundamental to have this approach. And for me, will be a priority, the points of islands. Also about islands, we have different needs because we have the big islands, little islands, outermost regions, and other different issues. It's important to have an approach that is also in this case a tailor-made approach. And this is the reason that it's clear how is important cohesion policy, because this approach is possible only with the cohesion policy.
Thank you very much. Alicia Holmes Ginel, SND.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. In order for cohesion policy to contribute to ensure the right to decent housing, which is what we're dealing with in this committee, it's key that the funds, apart from increasing them, which one thing's going on, are reach their goal and that they are destined to inclusive, decent housing, or else we run the risk of, rather than finding a solution, making things worse. So how are you going to ensure that the member states use these funds to invest in social housing and do not use it for purposes that might increase the speculation and worsen the problem, and that the funds don't end up, that is, in the wrong hands? Thank you.
Dobbiamo trovare delle soluzioni.
We have to find clear solutions in relation to the funds, and I agree with you. It's right and necessary that we avoid this risk. So we need to work to ensure that there are criteria in the use of these funds, agreed with the member states, that go along those lines. So the midterm review could be a good opportunity to do that, because that's an opportunity to update the existing programs and to lay down conditions which will ensure these criteria also for the future European budget and the future cohesion policy. Earlier I said it's important to modernize cohesion policy, and that's one of the key themes of the modernization. That's to ensure that the cohesion policy is brought into line with the new needs, and this is one of them. So we need to agree on this with the member states. No, at the moment we have a commissioner dealing with this. We have a clear we need for a clear plan, and we need all the member states to be involved, who they've all perceived the need, and the whole European Commission to agree the strategy. So we all have to work on this together, and we have to monitor it together, and with the Parliament too. I was in this Parliament for 3 terms, so I know very well that the Parliament must play a very important and constant scrutiny role, and I have great confidence in the joint work with you in this regard.
The floor to Maravillas Abadia Hover, EPP.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice President. Apart from the fact that the cohesion policy also already has funds for social housing and affordability, it's true that access to affordable housing is still a huge problem for millions of Europeans. And it's not just a question of social policy. It also affects groups which we would normally regard as vulnerable, and the cohesion policy can do more. It could help to mitigate one of the biggest problems, which is the costs associated with housing. And with investments in efficiency, you could help to reduce the rent charges. However, bureaucracy is still holding up the arrival of the funds and jeopardizing the projects that might work. We need effective policies so that resources are well used and don't get blocked in interminable bureaucracy. So I would ask that the cohesion policy should not yield to all these pressures of one fund for all. We should reflect how it might be made more flexible, more nimble, so that the funds arrive earlier and have a real impact. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that the principal work that we are making is to modernize cohesion policy. We have 2 possibilities now. One is to defend the current situation, and the risk is that we have a big problem with the cohesion policy, or to modernize cohesion policy. I believe that this is the goal that we'll realize and will be fundamental to give this answer in this direction. The midterm review is the opportunity to realize this project. It's not a simple work because it will be necessary to share with the member states, to involve, in my point of view, the European Parliament, the Committee of Regions, the President of Regions in all member states, in each member states, the mayors, because it's possible to start with this important reform of cohesion policy together. And this is our challenge. Housing is one part of this new approach that will make about cohesion policy and its reforms. This is the crucial point that we have now, because in my opinion, the midterm review is an opportunity to start with this work. And we'll see the result in this direction. I think that it will be fundamental to have a right approach by member states in particular. But I said before that I'm confident because we are aware that this is probably the fundamental call for cohesion policy. And I hope also that your contributions will be fundamental, like today in this debate. Thank you.
Okay, I have one last request from Charan Maloli, Renew. Very briefly.
Commissioner Fitto, I have just one question, and it has not been mentioned today. I think it's important to ask this question with regard to housing. The right to independent living and community inclusion for the European Union's 101 million citizens with disability is enshrined in Article 19 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Yet in practice, thousands remain in settings that do not reflect their needs or wishes, often due to a lack of appropriate housing and support services. You mentioned special needs in your comments earlier, cohesion funds have been important in that area. I ask you, especially when you go to our member states, to emphasise the serious need to accommodate people with special needs and with disabilities who are often living in nursing homes and other centres that are not appropriate. They are entitled to live in home. It is their right. Thank you.
Thank you. I fully agree with you. We must be this attention, and for me, it will be fundamental to confirm this. I agree with you. It's a logical approach and a right approach about this point. Thank you very much.
We are about to close. If you really have a 20 seconds question, I can give you the floor. Mrs. Junco Garcia.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you. Very briefly, I agree with my colleagues about this squatting in Spain. It's a disaster, and also about the supply of housing and these protections when 10 years go and rents go back to the market rates. So the dwellings are no longer protected in terms of the rent. We have 240,000 municipal authorities in Spain. So when it comes, that's a big problem in Spain with cohesion funds. Now, they're talking about reducing the number of municipalities in Spain, but it's crazy. And I think the European Commission should do something about this because it's completely unviable. And this is ripe terrain for speculation. Thank you.
Sì, posso capire la critica, ma
Yeah, I understand the criticism, but it's no way our competence. Imagine if the European Commission started getting into the sorting out the municipalities and member states. Imagine what a hornet's nest that would be. We can't do that, but we can work hard to agree criteria and choices that might make a contribution at a homogeneous contribution at European level, but on a shared basis with the member states.
Thank you very much. We've finished our time. Thank you all for the attendance, the interest, the participation. This was our first hearing. I think there was a great interest, but this is just the beginning. So please keep coming because there's more to come. Have a nice evening.
That's it.
Have a nice evening.